the backyard burning their personal papers. Yeah. I feel like we've been at this all morning, but I know we just got started. How are you?
Yeah, that's technical difficulties.
Yeah, yeah. But it happens.
Or as when Tab Brown was first getting started, she'd be like, production.
Well, you know, if we do a season two, maybe we'll have people who can work with this, I guess. I don't know. If we
It,
need that. Mm,
yeah, it is what it is. We working it out. So,
you know. Um,
I mean,
so
it seems like I just saw you, but then it seems like it was a while ago.
well, it was about a week ago, but
Yeah.
it does seem like it was a while ago.
Hmm.
Um, so I changed my name this week for a bunch of reasons, partially because we're talking about Black history, i.e., we are the Blacks. So I will say this. I have always loved our last name because it's Black. And there's no way around it. When I was a classroom teacher, students who were Black found pride in it. Students who weren't Black sometimes refused to say it. Like, I'm not, that is my name. It's not a bad word, so you can say it. So part of why I changed it to Black history is because of what we're talking about this week. And part of it is that I understand in many places in America and the world. Black history, we're talking a lot about Black history being erased, but Black history has always been erased, to
True.
be clear.
True.
So what we're experiencing now, I think we're experiencing it from the vantage point of having, multiple sources. Like there's an Instagram that talks about it. There, places you can go online and like this is what's happening in this state today. But Black history has always been erased. Just think of what we know and what we don't know, and what we're just now learning, even as Black people.
Right.
So it's always been erased. So I always want to champion the histories of our people because I'm a firm believer that if you don't know something, you're going to make the same mistakes again. And
Yeah. That,
with my own children, I always point out you can make other mistakes, but don't make the mistakes I already made. I already know how that's going to turn out. So just ask me and I'll tell you how it turns out. So that's this week. What about you?
I just kept mine as Janice this week just because I'm just feeling like just Janice.
I understand. I understand. So this week we're going to dive a little bit into our family history. And what I mean by that is just about who we are, where we came from, I guess the DNA of it.
Hmm.
Um, and, it's always interesting. I had a friend when we got our DNA done. And, I told him, hey, I got my results back. He was like, let me guess, you're not Native American, huh? So that is a huge thing. I don't know a single Black family in America that has not talked about having Native American blood.
Right.
And I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's because, like many other people, where, we want to be anything but Black, you want to add something else to it. I don't know what the rationale is. for wanting to have indigenous blood in you.
Hmm.
And what's the point? Or is that something, maybe it's not even us, maybe it's something our grandparents were like, well, you're not all the way black though.
Hmm.
So, you can still get into these circles. So I don't know, how that figures into everybody wanting to have indigenous blood in them.
Yeah, I don't know that either. Because certainly, you know, indigenous people, people indigenous to this country were not being treated as if,
Right.
they were indigenous to it. Like, people just plummeted over them and robbed, raped, looted the land. Um, but we're a great nation. Um, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
so in like so I don't know if it was because our lives at that time were really aligned. Maybe we were allies to one another. I don't know what that speaks to. But then but then you see different things like some of the same facial features um, are the same. And so maybe it was attributed to that, not knowing that, some of that is still attributed to our, Africanness, you
Well,
know.
what we now know is that peoples from various African nations sailed to what we now know as, the America,
Yeah,
hundreds of years before Columbus.
right,
Like they moved here and lived here.
right.
Like they stayed. So
Hmm.
clearly there in many indigenous peoples, there's African blood, and maybe that's what we're seeing,
That's okay. Yeah.
you know. But to be black in America is a lot. So, and I do understand, I don't agree with, but I do understand why some people want to be something other than black. I think they may think it gives them a pass for all the oppression
Well,
that is associated with being black.
I think we also have to realize that, as the generations progress, our thoughts about ourselves and what's acceptable is different. I mean, we were in the 60s and the early 70s. Yes, people were saying, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, but we still had a lot of colorism that was going on. And I mean, I guess having, grown up as a darker female in particular during that time, I can remember um, how people really talked about me for being really, really dark, and it was not necessarily a good thing. And so, as you talked about always being proud of your name,
Mhm.
on the other hand, I didn't have shame about it, but it did come with some taunting, you
Mhm.
know, to a certain extent that was not, um, pleasant as I was growing up. I mean, as I got older, um, and I have to say, part of it was some of my awakening when I was, in college, but definitely by the time I, hit the 90s, that's when I was like, hey, you know, you saw it in my dress, you saw it in how I was wearing my hair, just like um, a whole lot of different things resonated with me, and that, really embracing, my blackness like full on, like, this is me, this is who I am, I'm proud to be me, and not shying away from, yeah, there's no way that I'm gonna not walk in a room and you're not gonna know that I'm a black woman, like a dark feature, dark skin, you know, definitely African-ish features.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm definitely proud of that, at this point in my life, but it did come out of growth.
Well, I mean, I understand the African featureness, even though what we tend to, even today, find the most attractive are not necessarily it's Black people who don't have African features. That's what I think we tend to find the most attractive when we look at, the celebrities that people, swoon over, etc. For women anyway, they tend to be Black women who don't have the most African features. Um, but we had an aunt
Yes.
who passed away, and I think I got the pride from my name and maybe even myself from her, because she would always say, we're the Blacks, and when God made us, He threw the mold away. So I mean, she said that when we were
Mhm.
young.
Yes.
So I think I carried that throughout, you
And
know.
yeah, I think that we didn't really understand the power of those words because even despite that, I did carry those, with me as well. Like she was very intentional on speaking to us, not just about our name, but about our blackness. I mean, if you remember, I mean, she was kind of revolutionary herself because she was wearing an afro when
Yeah.
most people in her age range were still like pressing their hair out and like and like she used to go to get her hair done, so it was like one of the sharpest afros around. It was a long time before she like let that go, but I do remember, I remember that.
So do you remember when we got our DNA done?
Yes.
Okay. The first thing, so I got mine done first, and
Right.
then you were going to get yours done.
Right.
So I went to our parents and I said, I got my DNA done. Jan is going to get hers done. Is there anything you want to tell us? And I did that because, I don't know how it is with, I'm not a grandparent or anything of that nature, but I know those old Black people could keep a secret till the and they would still look at you like, even when you found out, like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I don't know what you mean.
yes. So interesting enough, I mean, as you're saying that, I just saw a video. It's kind of like a short documentary on. It's a kind of famous gospel artist, writer, producer, whatever, um, who just had that issue happen. Like after all these years, the person that he thought was his father um, comes to find out it's not his father. Um, he does DNA testing and finds out that this other man who he didn't know existed. The man didn't know he existed, but there were some rumors starting to, come around, and so they did the DNA test. Even after taking the DNA test twice,
Mhm.
his mother still was like, that ain't true.
Because we can keep a secret forever. I just don't. So I wanted to, prepare our parents for any.
Yes.
And mom was real cool. She was like, okay.
Hmm.
I was like, okay, she really doesn't have anything to hide here.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I was like, okay. Then she got her DNA done as well. And then we discovered that she's our mother.
Yeah.
But we also,
And you're saying that, but in the work that I do, a lot of times people find out, um, unfortunately, yes, that the person that you thought was um, your father is not your father. his cousin is really your father, or like
Mhm,
it's just like a regular, just along those lines. I mean, DNA testing is changing the game. Secrets that were long past, you know, have come up, or things that people didn't want to admit to.
mhm.
Um, now it's kind of like right in your face, but yeah, DNA is changing the game.
Well, and consequently, I also want to add that we know, although our father didn't get his DNA tested because he's not going to do that,
No,
uh, we do know that that's our father because our cousins have their DNA tested from our father's side of the family, and it shows that we're cousins.
yeah,
So that was interesting. But what it also shows is that we are 0%
zero,
Native American.
no percent at all,
No percentage, zero.
none,
Meaning,
none.
and I'm bringing this up because and I know that some of our cousins are going to be furious with this. They have not gotten their DNA tested and discovered it on their own. The We grew up believing
Hmm.
that our grandfather was Native American. I would say
Full
Native
Native
American
American.
Black. That's how I viewed it. But I've also heard he was just Native American.
Yes.
And if, you know, all things considered, that is our father's father. So those are
Hmm.
other things to consider. But if that is our father's father, he is not Native American. What I suspect, and this is just me, we would need, what's the guy who does the DNA testing?
Henry Louis Gates.
Henry Louis Gates. See, we don't have
Yes.
that kind of money because
No,
I
no, we don't
this
have
is
those
a good
connections,
story.
but I would love to find out a little bit more.
I think once we might want to chip in and get our DNA story. But what I do suspect is that our grandfather was mulatto.
Yes.
That's what I suspect. And our DNA points to that.
Hmm.
Our DNA points to, some European
Hmm.
bloodlines. So what I suspect, and I don't know, do you remember seeing him and you remember what he
I
looked like?
do. Yeah, I do. I remember him because I'm gonna be honest, I used to be scared of him. But yes, but I remember him like when we were little,
Mhm.
with the straight hair.
Yeah.
He's
And it was
very,
long for some
yes,
reason.
very, it was long, long straight hair. I do remember that. I remember his skin coloring. He definitely was more reddish tone as
Mhm.
opposed to like yellow tone. And not fair, but fair. you
Yeah.
know. So I do remember that. And then, even seeing him, as he got older, which I didn't see him that much, but older, the hair was still straight. He wore it shorter, but it definitely still straight. It wasn't textured hair.
Can I ask, what did you call him?
Daddy's father.
Yeah. I think I called him by his name, I'm sure, because dad called him by his name. And
Yeah.
as I was preparing this for to talk to you this week, I recognized that our mother called her father by his name, our
Yeah.
father called his father by his name, and I did not want, my children. I like him better than them calling me by my name, like I don't
Yeah.
really know them.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I
Yeah.
also believe, that, they didn't really know this man who was their father. That he had not spent a lot of time with them. And I understand, and I spoke to someone about
Well,
this the other day.
I
That, go ahead.
so which one we talking about?
Our father's father.
So, but I do
Mother's
think,
father too, but I'm talking about our father's father.
yeah, but I think that it was pretty much three sets of kids in that, that, you know, that marriage. So I think the older ones had a relationship with him, which that was apparent in how they, interacted with him and was always concerned about, his well-being and checking up on him and making sure all the, his needs were being met. I just think that as, the younger ones, not so much.
But I do think that him to them being Native American either answered some questions for them or gave them some mythical father figure that they were searching for.
Possibly.
Or it said that's why he acts that way. He's an Indian, as we would say.
Well, but see, I do remember growing up hearing, that um, a lot, and not just, it definitely is a stereotype, but just some of the anger and all of that,
Hmm.
the drinking,
Hmm.
um, you know, was attributed to the fact that there was quote unquote Indian, in our blood.
And I will go out on a limb again and say that's not true. What
Oh,
I'll
absolutely.
also say, just digging into the 1900 census, and I don't know how accurate this is for a Black family in 1900 to be effectively categorized by the census, the US Census. But, we now know that he didn't grow up with his father either.
Right,
And
right.
when people ask me about getting married again, I don't know if they ask you. Do they ask you, are you going to get married again?
Sometimes.
Do they?
Yeah, sometimes, but not really a lot.
Okay, maybe because the belief is that I'm a man and that I need a wife to take care of me as I get older.
Oh, yeah.
And I also think that's a horrible way to for a wife to live, just taking care of this old man and waiting until he dies. But we now know, so when people ask me, am I going to get married again? I always say, well, I don't think so, because everyone in my family has been married multiple times. Everyone. And they'll say, well, even your grandparents? Yeah. Now I know that my great grandparents were married multiple times on both sides of our family.
Yeah,
So maybe, I don't know if they can do this in our DNA. Maybe we have a predisposition to not being married or a predisposition to remaining single. That's what it looks like to me. Even though for some, to be fair, for some of them, their second and or third marriages worked out just fine.
yeah.
And by just fine, I mean that they stayed with that person until they died.
And they
Not
died.
necessarily that it worked out fine, but they were still with that person. But
Mhm.
just digging into this 1900 census, we see our father's father, our grandfather, having a step parent
Mhm.
and additional siblings. And and you saw the census as well. What was the thing that stood out to you the most?
About the 1900
Yeah.
census? Um, I mean, it was a couple things. I mean, clearly, yes, that he had a stepfather. There were children that were born into that union clearly after they got married. Like clearly, that both of them came into that marriage with children. Um, and just like I said, those younger siblings. Um, the ages, I think the other thing that kind of struck me is, as a 14-year-old young man, or we would call him boy, but young man, clearly, he already had a job as a laborer, a
Yeah.
farm laborer. So that speaks a lot about, our history, and that's why these kinds of things are important to know. because now, I mean, farm labor. So basically, we're saying that he was out there picking cotton.
or something.
Yeah,
Tobacco, maybe,
yes.
but it
Well,
was
because it was, yeah, because of where it was, it probably more likely it was tobacco. Um, so those kind of nuances. Um, if we want to speak on the the other census where he was married to our grandfather, I mean our
grandmother.
grandmother. Yeah, by the time you get like the difference in their ages, although that was I guess common, but like he was what 34 and she was about 17.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I was just like, oh my God. you know. Um,
Clearly, he was an old man who needed a young woman to take care of him in his as he got older.
well, but the other thing is you're also talking about society and culture as it was at that particular
Hmm.
time. That was like the nuance. My daughter gets on me all the time because I still love black and white movies, but I guess the more aware that I become or the older I become, watching them gives me like some
Yeah,
cringing.
like remember our mother used to hate those Shirley Temple movies?
Yes, yes.
Like,
And
why are
and,
you all
and
watching that?
yeah, and understandably why. And so I've been watching these movies, and like one that I watched today, um, this woman wanted to have she wanted to get married, or it was a couple. They wanted to get married. She wanted to keep her job. Now this movie is like in the 30s.
Okay.
Um, so they go back and forth because he's like, "She, you don't need a job. I'll take care of you." Okay, so they get married. She keeps her job. He ends up giving up an opportunity that will take him overseas so that he can be in this marriage. He's making $40 a week, and I think she's making like 20. Then she starts getting the raises. Then she's making $50 a week, and then he loses his job.
Mm,
And so then they show like the home. Now, mind you, they don't have no kids or nothing, but the home is in disarray because, she ain't there. He's ordering food out and bringing it home because she's not there cooking. Like all of these things that kind of symbolize, like, if she were at home, it wouldn't be like this.
hmm.
They end up, kind of separating because of, he's having a hard time dealing with the fact that she's the breadwinner and, he hasn't found a job yet and yada, yada, yada. Till they get to the point where he finally gets a job, but it's going to take him like, out of state. And she then has come to her senses and realized, I need to be with my husband. So she quits her job so they can just live off of his salary. I'm just like, that's a clear message. And so I say all that to say, I think that that was, the way society was. And when you talk about, back then, it was a big deal to assimilate into the dominant culture. I won't call them the majority, but
Hmm.
definitely the dominant culture at that time was that, children did what parents told them to do, wives did what husbands told them to do, and the husband was the one that was the major provider.
Right.
We also know that though even in the rural South, because of Jim Crow and other laws, it was hard for all of the family not to be working,
Right.
but there still was that a semblance or that need for control for the head of the household, which at that time was the male. So
And
I just
as
think,
it says on the census,
as it
it
says on
says
the
the head.
census, yes,
It doesn't say husband, it doesn't say man, it says head, and there's a
yes,
man's
it's Ted,
name there.
yes,
No,
yeah,
in every entry,
yes, in every
eh,
entry, yes,
yeah, yeah. So the
yeah.
thing that struck me the most from I forgot to turn off my phone again. Did you see that from the last one?
Yes, I was like, okay, not only is the phone going off, but he's looking at it. background. Like, we doing a show here. We're trying to be as professional as
Yeah, and
possible.
today I was like, I'm going to make sure my phone is off, and I got all these screens going on so I can go back and forth and with everything that we're talking about. Um, but what struck me the most from the 1900 census was the state. No one has ever mentioned Kentucky,
Oh, that's true.
ever. I'm like, this man was born in Kentucky. So that leads me to questions. So and we have basic information for at least for this grandparent.
Mm,
Um, so for this side of the family, not even our grandmother, but all we know is that she was married to this guy.
right.
But we have basic information for him because again, he was the head. So
Hmm.
there would be more information for the head than anyone else.
Right.
Um, but so that leads me to questions. The questions I have, are why go further south
Hmm.
when everyone else is going to California? In 1918 or 1900 or whatever year this is, why go further? Or why not go to, we know there were thriving Black Wall Streets all over the South, including North Carolina, Oklahoma, as we know. Why not go there? Make your fortune. So I do have some questions, and I wish we had an opportunity, first of all, to have all this information when we were younger and could really ask people, like, what were you thinking? What were you doing? How come
Right.
all that stuff. As we know, those old people could keep a secret forever. And clearly they did, that we're just now finding out, you know, how many years, almost 40 years after his death? Like, wait a minute, you're not Native American. But so that's one question that I have. And there was some information that I found, and I couldn't find it again, that suggested a different last name. And I can't find it again. And so maybe it's the wrong person or something like that. But I do, I recognize that after, emancipation, or what we consider emancipation,
Hmm.
when formerly enslaved people were picking their own name, a lot of them selected, names to represent who they were now,
Right.
freemen,
Right.
black men, freedman.
Hmm.
So maybe that was a name that his family selected,
Right.
you know, to say, hey, I don't belong to so and so's family anymore.
Right.
Is there anything that brought out questions for you?
Concerning the information that we
Yeah, just
received.
from the information
I
which is all
mean,
we have.
yeah, I mean, I mean, I definitely, like you would I want to know more about like what was happening in Kentucky.
Hmm.
You know, you know, he, he was an ordained minister, so, I don't know if that's what brought him to,
That's
Alabama,
possible.
but that's, you know, because the African American church at that time, you're talking the early 1900s, was starting to, thrive and build. And so people were being sent, to different areas to start churches, plant churches, as they say, or, to minister, in different ways that hadn't happened before. So I don't know if that, was,
Mhm.
the reason. And certainly, we have one person left that can probably give us some of the answers, but the people that we
Maybe.
really, yeah, I said some, um, I definitely want to know a little bit more about our grandmother's side as well,
Mhm.
though. She does still have two living sisters. Um, and actually some other cousins,
Hmm.
which, um, so, oh, you know what? I'm gonna take that back. Those are our dad's cousins.
Okay,
So the children from her sisters.
okay.
I don't know that, yeah, at this point that any of them, any of her siblings are still alive.
You know, I had an opportunity to spend time with our parents last week, and
Mhm.
I can safely say that you're probably not going to get too many answers. I think it would raise more questions than answers. But this, I mean, just talking to them, you know, some things they remember, some things they don't.
Right.
And I think they're probably more open to not keeping the historical secrets than they were previously. Like they're
Hmm.
more willing to say, oh yeah, that's what happened, or that's who that was, or that was going on there. Just sitting, listening to them talk. And I hope you got a rest during that week.
I did. I did
Which
it.
goes
Thank you.
back to our
It was very helpful.
something we said previously. The sibling who does not live there needs to come around a bit more and, just give the sibling or siblings that do live in proximity to the aging parents, just give them a break sometimes. So I hope you got a break during that. So we have all this information, and like you said, I'd like to get information on our maternal side, both of, her parents and of course our grandmother from our paternal side. What do we do with the information? What do we do with this?
Well, I think one, it answers questions, but two, I think one of the things I don't, and I know that there are some families that do, but we haven't done a really good job of passing information down. Like,
Yeah,
there are some families that know, like, from the time they hit, America, at least, even if they don't know beyond that, they know like their family kind of history, third and fourth, and sometimes fifth generation. We don't have, all of that. So I do think that that would be helpful. I think it would also help us to understand, like how you see in, with Dr. Gates when he's
yeah,
doing the, like, you know, there's so much that's in a lineage. And
right,
you're like, like, why am I like that? Like, when people find out, like, that, they're a writer and then their great great grandmother was also a writer,
right,
and I mean, just like, I do think that things like that, you know, are, generational, like, we carry, some of the things, whether it's the dreams that they didn't get a chance to follow through with, that, we are now really, that dream come true. I do believe that we are like our ancestors, quote, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. I mean, I think that sometimes we are the ones that can carry the football over the goal line,
mhm.
and, but it would be nice to know that.
Well, I noted that our grandfather had a fourth grade education. We know that our father went to college,
Yes.
but did not
Well,
graduate.
yes, he didn't graduate, but here's the thing, even with that fourth grade education, our grandfather was was a businessman. I mean, beyond being and lived in one of the largest houses in that small town and had properties and things like that. So the education wasn't about, not having the
Yeah.
capacity or the intellect. The I'm sure that had more to do with the fact that he needed to work to help the family.
Well, also, so there were once Anita Baker was asked something about Whitney Houston and, why isn't she bigger or whatever the case is. And she answered very plainly, it takes three generations to make a Whitney Houston. You got to start out with, Dionne Warwick, then you get, whoever was next. And then you get to Whitney Houston, who can become a
Mhm.
pop superstar. And I say the same thing. So someone asked me something about education or something. I'm like, it takes 3 generations to make a Dr. Black.
Mhm.
Well, I say 3 generations after slavery because our grandfather was born in the late 1800s.
Right.
So it takes 3 generations to do that. So, and we're here. So we got
Mhm.
that. So
Yes.
what happens next should be about what we can do next and how we can carry the ball past the goalpost and,
Yeah. Yeah.
even further than that. So it's time for our rapid fire questions. Um, what do you think our DNA reveals about us? And before you answer, here's one thing, because you triggered something that Ma used to say about her grandfather, who she said, and Dr. Gates has not done our DNA, so so we can only go by these historical stories, that she said was one of the last slaves brought over from Africa. As we now know, although the America had outlawed bringing any more slaves over, people were still
We're
being
still
brought.
bringing, yes, absolutely.
Anyway, so she mentioned that he was one of the last slaves brought over, and he still spoke in his
Native tongue.
language.
Mhm.
And I just think that's so powerful. So I think about him, I think probably more, um, because I guess Ma knew him, I guess. I'm thinking
Mhm.
either she knew or she had heard of. And I've never heard anybody from our father's side of the family speak past our grandfather. Like they've never talked about a grandmother, their
Mhm.
grandmother.
Their grandmother. Mhm.
So, what do you think our DNA reveals about us?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we're clear about is that, I mean, because we mostly showed us in Africa, like that was dominant. To me,
Yeah.
I'm going to say that speaks to the fact that we probably were some of the last, like
Yeah.
our ancestors were probably some of the last slaves to come to America because it is so much more dominant.
Hmm.
Like I've seen people that get their DNA and it's like 50%, or like our numbers, though we have some Eurocentric DNA, the percentage is a lot smaller.
Right. Our African DNA is predominant. Our European DNA is very minuscule.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Um, I, I'm actually fine with it.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have to have any of anybody else's blood in me, but I'm actually fine with it. I think it does speak to the fact that, you know, why we have the features that we do, and,
Hmm.
why they're a little bit more prominent than, other persons of color, or other Black folks. Um, so yeah, I'm fine with it.
You talked about being a darker skinned woman earlier. The only
Mhm.
thing I can probably say that really bothered me was my nose as a child, because it's
Well,
big and
we
it's
have our father's
flat.
nose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's big and it's flat, and my children have that nose.
It's a dominant trait. Like,
Uh-huh. And when I was talked to Dad the other day, I reminded him that our grandmother, who was deeply, deeply superstitious,
superstitious, yes.
deeply superstitious,
Yes,
said that she had called a man old flat nose when she was pregnant
with
with
him,
him,
yes.
and that's why we
Mhm.
have this flat nose today. So if but the real reason may be that we were some of the last people to come over here. You know, our
Yeah.
ancestors were some of the last people to come over here. So we have real African noses, you know.
Hmm.
So how do you categorize yourself? How do you say you're black? Do you say you're, mixed? And let me I remember when I got to college, we're from Detroit and we grew up in Detroit in the 70s and 80s. There weren't a lot of people other than black people at that time, right? So when I got to high school, there was always some lighter skinned person, not fair, not biracial, just lighter or yellow, as we used to call them in the day, who would
Hmm.
say, well, I'm not black. And we're all looking at them like, well, what are you? Well, I'm Creole or I'm, mixed or I'm so anything but being black. So that's why I asked about the mixed. All right, so and you may have considered yourself part Native American. I don't know.
Okay, so what I call myself, um, I mean, most of the time I probably say African
Mhm,
American, but I use black a lot too, because that was what we, kind of grew up with. I mean, I noticed like, I want to say like I remember, when we were younger, like our grandmother referring to people as colored. So,
mhm,
and I remember reading this, um, having our say by the Delaney sisters.
mhm,
And one of the things that they talked about in the book is at the time they were, as they were growing up, you were going from the shift from being colored to black.
mhm,
And they was not having that black stuff. They were
mhm.
like, we are color. So I think that part of it is like, kind of what you grow up with or what, the culture is at that particular time. It does appear that less and less people are worried about being African American, even though it's on a lot of our, forms as a racial designation. You just hear people saying black.
Well,
Um, go
I
ahead.
never went with, well, I can't say never, but I consider myself black. So I don't identify as African American. Um, and I don't know when I made that mental shift, but I want people to understand that that slave ship stopped everywhere.
Oh yeah.
And all of those people are my brothers and sisters, not just the people here in America.
Right.
The slave ship stopped in South America, it stopped in the islands, it stopped in, all these other places before it even got here.
Hmm.
So I want to identify with all of them as well.
Right.
So that's why I identify as black to encompass all of those things and not just the people who are here, because clearly we have some relatives who are still in Africa,
Yes.
and I want
Yeah.
to identify, I want them to know that, we're the same bloodline and I'm not going to separate myself out like, oh, I'm
Right.
African American. So no. The last thing, because you made me think of this, on our mother's birth certificate, it says colored.
Yes, it does.
My birth certificate, probably yours too, it says Negro.
Yes, it does.
On my child's birth certificate, it says nothing.
Mm.
They didn't put any more
Right.
racial designations. And I'm sure there's a reason for that. And, that would be a Dr. Henry Louis Gates question. Like, why they stop doing that? Because I'm sure there's a reason.
Mhm.
Um, but that's it for today. Any last words?
I don't, you know what, this one, I had to say, this one seems really deep, and I wasn't expecting it to be, you know, as deep as it is. But I mean,
I,
which means it's a lot.
it's a
Um,
lot.
yeah,
I
it's a
would,
lot.
I would probably say that our family is not unique. I'm sure that if most Black families in America probably start to peel through some of this, those that aren't thinking that the government's trying to steal your DNA for something, that they might find a lot of similarities in what we just said.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm laughing about the government, like, um, I'm sure of that. I think that this is something that bears on the hearts of men and women, Black men and women, like you said, you know, not just in America, you know, you know, Spain, I mean, different the Caribbeans, like
Yeah.
wherever, those slave
Wherever
ships
Black
went.
people are.
Yeah, that, there's, something to be said about the fact of not even wanting to know who you are, but understanding who you are, and for the parts that we do know, not wanting that to be erased. Like,
Right.
we don't want it whitewashed or you know, rubbed down in such a way that it makes everybody feel okay with, I mean, we're talking about our ancestors here. Like, none, we weren't here when all of that stuff happened, but we do feel the effects of it.
Hmm.
So, it's important that we don't lose sight of that, and we don't allow anybody to take that away from
Well said.
us.
Well said. All right, that's it for today. I'll see you later.